how would you describe current strategy of every participant of peace talks, and how would you assess chances of each participant to outplay the opponent?
Well, look, I think it's impossible to outplay Ukraine on the diplomatic front. You can only outplay Ukraine on the military front, and that is becoming very hard for Russia to do. Although it's exacting a lot of pain and suffering and destruction as a result. I think that the United States has been outplayed by Russia. I don't think Ukraine has been outplayed, partly because Ukraine has, its people are part of this process. In the United States, the people are not part of this process. We would have better policy if public opinion were influencing the diplomatic process. And also the Russian people aren't involved in the process. So the Ukraine has the strength that its foreign policy is roughly a reflection of what its people want. Whereas in the United States, there's great sympathy for Ukraine, great hatred of and distrust of Putin in public opinion sampling, and yet the president behaves in another way. And I think eventually with President Trump's ratings, so paradoxically, I think that Ukraine is in the strongest diplomatic position of not being outplayed because it has to make its decisions based on very pragmatic issues of reflecting the public will of the Ukrainian people, the public will of those people who are in combat and who have laid their lives on the line. It would be U.S. policy would be better if it listened to its own people, and I believe that Russian policy, if Russia were more attuned to public opinion, my view is that the Russian people in general are afraid to say it, but they want this thing to end, and they'd like to reach a settlement. But back to the diplomacy, I think Russia has outplayed, Putin has played Trump. But Ukraine has, I think, handled this deftly. First of all, Ukraine has intelligently tried not to alienate the president of the United States. It has tried to make it clear to him that they want to help him in achieving his aim of winning a Nobel Peace Prize and bringing a peace settlement, and they're willing to do many things to move in that direction, and they've kept that balance. A much better performance than in the Yermak prepared disastrous Oval Office meeting of last year, which set back relations for several months. It took a bit of time to repair. So I think since then the Ukrainians have been behaving better, and I think the team. Well, there's a weak foreign minister right now, but maybe that will be resolved soon. But there is, with Mr. Kyslytsya in the president's office, with Mr. Budanov, there is a very competent and intelligent team. So I think the Ukrainians are the best positioned, and they've played this well. And Russia has played it well. The weakest performance diplomatically has been by this amateur diplomacy by Mr. Witkoff that has, I think, and President Trump's unwillingness to use the full instruments of power and force that the United States can bring upon both the Russian economy and the Russian and exert more military pressure on Russian forces by giving Ukraine the kind of long range capabilities to strike deep into the heart of Russian military industrial infrastructure.
International media reported that USA hint Ukraine that any American security guarantees are dependent on our readiness to withdraw Ukrainian troops from all territory of Donbass. And if I understood correctly, the sequence of actions looks like first Ukraine withdraw troops, and then we will talk about implementation of security guarantees. What do you think about this kind of trajectory?
Well, first of all, I think it's up to the Ukrainian people. It depends on what is meant by that phrase. For Ukraine to withdraw in the context of a ceasefire where both sides agree that they will not use that to put their troops in, if this is to create a demilitarized zone as part of the withdrawal, then and then come these very extensive security guarantees. Then I think it's something that the Ukrainians could entertain. It's a kind of a very interesting formula if the intention is the way it has been sounded is that Ukrainians withdraw from that territory rather than cede that territory. That's one thing. Ukraine is not ceding that territory, and it also presumably has to come with an assurance that Russia will not be using that as an advantage to occupy that territory. If it is the cession of territory, I think it's unsustainable politically for the Ukrainians to contemplate, given the state of public opinion, whatever one may think of it. I mean, maybe the Ukrainian people will change their minds and say that if we get into Europe, if we get bilateral ironclad defense treaties, if we have massive investment, and if we have a massive commitment of Europe to integrate all those people who have to leave that territory to integrate well into the rest of Ukraine, maybe the Ukrainian people will change their minds about whether that is an acceptable formula. But at the moment, allowing Russia to simply take that territory is unacceptable to the Ukrainian people. It would only create internal political turmoil, and I think that President Putin knows this. He wants instability in the country. He wants division in the country, and such a concession is untenable given the current state of public opinion, because it's not just. This is not just an opinion held by the Ukrainian people, but it's a passionately, deeply held opinion that we are not surrendering and withdrawing territory, all the more so that Putin is not able to conquer that territory by military means. He's moving. It's going to take him at the pace he's moving, it's going to take him another 4 or 5 years to occupy the rest of the territory that he currently claims, and it'll take him 100 to 120 years to occupy for Russia to occupy the rest of Ukraine. So I don't think that the Ukrainians are able to make that kind of a bargain. But it is, if there is a clear package of incentives for Ukraine offered by Europe and the United States in exchange for this, they would have to be put to the Ukrainian people. They can't be, and I think that they would be of such a nature to satisfy the security needs of the Ukrainian people, to the extent that they might even consider a non-forced withdrawal from the Donbass. That those incentives would be such that the Russians would find them not acceptable for Russia's own sense of its own sense of security, or more accurately, its own desire to make sure that Ukraine is militarily weak and then subject to the Russian sphere of influence. So I just don't see how this works, which is why I just don't see this negotiation getting us there. I think there is a way to get to a settlement, but I think that it is only through the use, as I say, the use of economic power, military, kinetic power, that the United States is reluctant to greenlight, but which has worked well for Trump in other circumstances. So perhaps there is still the chance that eventually he will come to the conclusion that, trying to appeal to the better interests of, his personal friendship with Putin, that is not the pathway to peace, but that force and exploiting Russia's economic weakness, which is increasingly clear, is the way to do it.
Yeah, I would like to talk to you about one more tool which can force Russia for concessions. We have observing that Russian Shadow Fleet is under sanction and military attacks, but it still has thousands of ships and many options to circumvent sanctions. How situation with this Russian source of income could develop?
Well, first of all, we've seen an effect of sanctions and threatened sanctions, and I think that here again, there are, first of all, the United States has shown that it is willing to interdict. I think that the fact that Russian flag vessels were stopped in Venezuela was a bit of a shock to Putin and the system, and I think he chose to ignore it because of his deeper fear that this could grow into something that could affect the U.S. interest in interceding to stop the operations of the Shadow Fleet. But even with the not fully, there's now this bigger legislation that Senator Lindsey Graham has put forward, and he said that the president now supports it, but that the president has yet again frozen because of these negotiations and his hopes of a positive result through kindness and goodwill with Putin. But nevertheless, in the last year, as we saw from the most recent statistics, Russian proceeds from exports of oil have dropped 30% in the last year. There is, additional, and the revenues to the Russian state. Lukoil is asking for a private Russian company, but nevertheless is asking for government subsidies because their financial situation is critical. So this has already had a large effect. The fact that the Russian VAT has been raised from 20 to 22%, which is a very high tax on Russian consumers, and feeds inflation and the cost of living to make up the revenue shortfalls from the sale of energy. So this has already had a huge effect, and I think yet again to use the capacity and the will of the United States in conjunction with Europeans to interdict more of this is an important tool left in the toolbox for forcing us, for exacerbating Russian economic pressure on Russia. But so is this legislation that would give the United States president, the authority to sanction even those who are consumers of the products of the Shadow Fleet. It's very easy to track this. There is all of these. There are you can follow the movement of large tankers and so on through the major global bodies of water on an hourly basis, just as you can track air travel. So this is very well known where they're going, from where they are coming, and sanctions so there are two ways of it. One is through this enhanced legislation that Senator Graham is hoping to pass, and the other is the U.S. active interdiction, as they showed they are willing to do in the case of Venezuela and even Russian flag boats moving Venezuelan oil. Those are the two ways to ratchet up even further the pressure, but the pressure has already been quite successful and has already had an impact on the Russian state budgetary receipts.